So this panel is an attempt to pull together a few colleagues from across the university. We're a little SIS heavy here, but that's my bias, to think about how faculty members are already incorporating community-led, community-based research methodologies and teaching pedagogies into their work, and how they're navigating it from all of these various disciplines, from public health to public anthropology to environmental science, and what we can learn from each other, and particularly how we can think about this realm of research as cutting-edge research in terms of broader impact, but also in terms of intellectual merit. That this is actually the kind of research that produces all the more robust data and all the more relevant data in a very integrative understanding of expertise that's working with community expertise and building off of that. So I think what we'll do is, as Glenn and I might keep kind of shuffling with some of the visuals here, we might just begin. And we have Dr. Sonya Grier joining us from COCOD, Dr. Derrick Cogburn, Maria de Jesus, Amanda Taylor from School of International Service, Mike Bader, sociologist from College of Arts and Sciences, and Amanda Choutka joining us from Writing Studies. We also have Dr. Jenny Roberts joining us from the law school. She's currently teaching, so she's dashing across campus at the end of her course to join us right next to Amanda to share the work in public clinical law practice they're doing over at the law school and how that is part of a larger campus effort to foreground community engaged scholarship and to really take it to the next level. So after we do our presentations, which are very informal, and just really snapshots of the extraordinary work that's already happening on campus, our goal, of course, is to acknowledge the work that's happening, connect it, and take it to the next level. But I want to open up the floor thereafter to you. So plan on sharing your own experiences in this realm of scholarship and teaching, and how you can be part of this broader campus-wide conversation on really getting it into our hiring, tenuring, and promotion guidelines. Excellent community engaged scholarship. Sonya.
Okay. So I've been involved in community engaged scholarship in two primary ways, and I'm going to look at my notes so that I don't go over the 6 minutes that we have. First way I've been engaged is as a member of something called the African American Obesity Research Collaborative Network. ACORN, the other ACORN, not the house of ACORN, was started in 2002 because Shriki Kumanyiku, who started it, who's my mentor, realized that there was an obesity epidemic. This is before this came into news, everything, and there was no research about Black Americans related to obesity. So ACORN's mission was really to develop research, both in terms of quality and quantity, and find out ways to translate this research into obesity prevention strategies. So as a necessity, the network includes community partners who are part of our overall process. So the focus of ACORN was really to look at a community through their lives and find out where the problem fits within their lives, as opposed to looking at the problem and then targeting a community in that way. So I was am director of research, food marketing research for the network. And in 2006, we got a $5 million grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation just focused on food marketing. I was the only marketing person in the network. It's mostly epidemiologists, nutritionists, etc. So as director of food marketing research, I was heavily involved in a lot of ways in terms of community-based scholarship. So one, I designed an internal grant competition so that we could fund these studies. So we had to evaluate these proposals related to community-based research in order to fund them. Then I helped to design multi-site studies. I provided technical assistance and helped to then analyze data across different sites. We had 6 sites typically within any study that we would do. For example, I helped to develop a community-led counter-marketing campaign where teams tried to increase the accessibility of healthy foods in their community. So we got some students together, we had them go out and find other people. It was totally peer-led. We developed a Facebook group. There's a picture of it. Pretend like you see it. Facebook group, Instagram, everything. And it became very much community engaged. And we also saw the reverberations around their family members as well. So that was the first piece of my community engagement. The second piece was part of a disciplinary subgroup. I'm part of something called TCR, or Transformative Consumer Research. And it includes dialogical conferences that happen every other year where you have tracks of people who focus on a particular topic. So I was on the track that was in innovative methods, and we decided, there were 9 of us, we spent the 2 days of the conference coming up with identifying a research void. And we decided to look at social impact of research because we had an international group. There were a lot of things going on at the time in the UK in particular, thinking about how do you evaluate social impact. And so from that, we decided to write a paper that really focused on how do you increase both the relevance and the rigor of research in business that's focused on trying to gain some type of social impact. So we did a literature review of the research on social impact, and something that we identified, I think is relevant for this conversation, that there's really 4 ways that research is talked about in terms of impact. And one is the creation and publication of findings, the awareness of the findings, the use, and then the benefits that accrue to society. Most of the metrics that we use, because they're easy and quantitative, are metrics that really focus on creation and publication and use. What are the journals? How many journal articles do you have? How many citations do you get? But they really don't address the use and benefits. So what's needed is to really think about how do you get at assessing the use and the benefits. And so we engaged with this tension, and it was a really interesting discussion because you also can't hold academics accountable for something that might take many, many years to happen in terms of changing paradigms, changing ideas, and having that type of social impact. So what we focused on was something we developed called the relational impact. Sorry. And we call it the relational engagement research approach. So in this approach, academics collaborate actively with communities and other types of stakeholders to co-create, and focus is on analyzing and understanding the impacts that come from here and identifying metrics that focus on the aspects of the relations. So that would be sort of a midpoint between the end of social impact and just the getting your research out there. And we highlighted 3 ways that we thought the interaction with communities really increases the rigor and the relevance of research. One is productive interactions, and there's a whole literature on productive interactions where the co-creation of knowledge makes both parties that much stronger. The second is the enhanced capacities that come from it. So just being able to bring in and integrate the contextual information helps to create capacities both in the researcher as well as in the community or the other stakeholders. And then the last one was improve social networks. And this is really important because the networks often drive the influence of the research in a particular field, and the networks can also help to disseminate the innovations. So if we can identify metrics that might relate to these productive interactions, enhance capacities, or improve social networks, that's one way we might get at this issue. I think I kept the 6 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Sonya.
Great. So I'll start now. I've also got some pretty pictures for you if they show up. But what I wanted to do was to talk about what we call Beyond Being There for all of us. So this is a study that I just published and just presented last week. I was influenced towards use-inspired research in my first faculty position. My first faculty position was at the University of Michigan at the School of Information. And there's a book called Pasteur's Quadrant by Donald Stokes, who was, I think he was the dean of the graduate school at Michigan. But he focuses on what's called use-inspired research, like Louis Pasteur, where you do rigorous scientific research, but it has an immediate applied use, and people can see how it has an impact on their lives. So the community that I do a lot of work with is the disability community and the global disability community. And one of the things that is really exciting for the disability community is that at a global level, we talk about global governance emerging, and there are opportunities for the global disability community to get engaged in global governance processes in a way that they haven't in the past. And it's really exciting, and one of the things that it makes me think is that I wish I had a whole team of faculty members and doctoral students and master's students and undergraduate students working in this area. And we do have some of that. It's growing, but I would like more. So if any of this really interests you, please come let me know. There are more than 1 billion people in the world living with some form of disability, and so it's quite likely that either we have a disability, we know somebody with a disability, or we will become disabled in our lifetime. And so there's an increasing opportunity at the global governance level for engaging in a whole series of conferences, frameworks, strategic policy processes around persons with disabilities. So things like the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the Sustainable Development Goals and its 17 specific goals, Habitat 3 and the New Urban Agenda, as well as the Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction and the follow-up to that, which was the Dhaka Declaration on Disability Inclusive Disaster Risk Reduction. So the title of this work is Beyond Being There. So what do we mean by being there? What does it mean to be involved in global governance? So there's a really pretty picture of the UN General Assembly. And global governance processes are strange to a lot of people, where you have thousands and thousands of people crammed into rooms in Geneva, in New York, in Paris, really kind of negotiating over documents and text. That's what we mean by being there. And so how do persons with disabilities participate in that process is one of the key areas. So one of the earliest documents that influenced my work is a study called Beyond Being There by Sonya and Holland, where they look at the kinds of technologies that the telecommunications industry has fostered on us for remote participation. These kind of high-end video conferences, you have to go into a special room and have quality of service, to get kind of crystal clear, high-definition video. And they said that's the wrong way, because you're trying to replicate being there as opposed to going beyond being there. So this study really influenced a lot of my work to say, can we use things like web conferencing tools where you can have video, but you get audio and you get, you can see the slides and you can collaborate together and work together and so forth. So this idea of beyond being there was, taken up by the National Science Foundation. They sort of reified this idea of beyond being there in its virtual teams and organizations conference and blueprint that I helped to develop. And then we took that strategy into working with the disability community and building a nationwide collaboratory for the global disability community to work together. But because we have all of these opportunities now at a global level, we wanted to see what was happening at a global level. And last year at the Hawaii International Conference on System Sciences, I was exposed to a new tool called mobile remote presence devices, or robots. And so I was really excited about thinking about how do we now use these robots to complement the successful work that we've been doing with web conferencing. So we decided to work with two communities, the global disability community, something called the Disability Inclusive Disaster Risk Reduction Network, DIDRRN, and UNISDR, which is the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. And they manage the Sendai Framework, which was seen as the most accessible global conference in history. So in May, we had an opportunity to do a study that allowed us to study the impact of web conferencing and these robots on participation by the global disability community in the first follow-up conference to the Sendai conference. It was called GP 2017. And one of the things we wanted to get at was what were the goals of the disability community for participating in a conference like this, but also what were the goals of UNISDR for this participation by this global disability community. And so one of the things that's really striking in terms of this kind of community participation is because we had the cooperation of UNISDR, we were able to integrate our work intimately into all aspects of the conference. And I've got some great pictures, and I'll tell you about that later. But we were able to do a really exciting study that compared web conferencing and these mobile remote presence devices in terms of the degree to which they allowed these two communities to achieve their objectives. Now, going back to the past towards quadrant research, we don't just do these interesting things, right? We write about them. What kind of new knowledge can we create that comes out of these interesting experiments? So we have a paper that we published last week that was nominated for Best Paper at the Hicks Conference, which is the #1 to #3 information systems conferences in the world, was nominated for Best Paper. We didn't get it, but it was nominated for Best Paper because we believe that you do these interesting things in collaboration with these communities, but you then publish the scientific results that come from it. So, thank you.
Great. This goes quick, so I'm going to be brief as well. I'm Maria de Jesus at SIS, and primarily my work is situated within health disparities, health inequalities, and health communication strategies as one mechanism that can reduce some of these health disparities. There's a lot we can learn in terms of global health challenges and lessons and apply those to the local setting and have a local impact. So one project that I wanted to highlight is my work with African immigrant communities here in the district. So some of you may know HIV disparities is at its largest in the district, which means mostly that African women, African immigrant women, and Black women in general in the district are the most burdened by HIV and its consequences, and that's nationally. So clearly this is a challenge for the district, it's a challenge for the United States, it's a challenge globally. And in thinking about this work, one of the first things obviously that comes to mind is community engagement, and what does it mean to actually engage with communities, in the plural, to learn from them, learn from them in terms of what their lived experiences are, what they envision as some of the barriers and potential solutions to actually impacting in a positive way these HIV disparity statistics. And when I say learn from them, I think one of the first things that comes to mind in terms of community engaged research is actually valuing the knowledge of these women in particular, but communities at large, just as much as we value, let's say, the academic expertise or the academic knowledge. So understanding the different sources of knowledge are valuable and needed. And not only learning that sort of from an intellectual perspective, but actually believing it. And so that's one of the first things I think that this research needs to assume in terms of community-based research. The second is informing these academic community partnerships, being consistent. So not only in terms of how we're talking about the research, what we're saying, but in our actions. So I felt the need as an investigator, as being in solidarity with the community to learn more about what was going on, that I needed to be consistent, purposefully self-disclose, and develop relationships with these women, some of whom became co-investigators. So they weren't simply, to use Garrett's remarks at the outset, that they aren't simply subjects that we're, studying with or studying on or studying for, but that they actually become co-participants, co-investigators, and that we truly think of them and enact in ways that portray that belief. So in this research, and I won't go into all the details, but it was funded by the Center for AIDS Research. And one of the things that we did was to find out, well, what is it that, what are the driving factors? And obviously these are complex factors, complex realities that are driving the statistics that we're seeing primarily with African immigrant and Black women in the district. We came to learn that there isn't a universal one-size-fits-all approach, that in fact we needed to understand what those specific sociocultural, systemic, familial, communal, individual level barriers are. So just to give you one example, among the Ethiopian and Eritrean women, one of the things we found very, very clearly in the data is that going to get an HIV test, which some of you may or may not know the background to this, but there was a huge health policy in the district that test and treat strategy, which is basically if you were to get your whole population, whole meaning, the majority of the population, to get an HIV test, that can actually have an impact because once you know your status, you can get hopefully access to treatment, which in the district is actually quite generous, and therefore make an impact. Well, what we came to understand with this particular community of Ethiopian and Eritrean women is that it's not as simple as saying, here, go get the test, or even giving women access to the test. That in fact, it was much more nuanced. It was a negative behavior to say to women to go get the test, because it essentially was saying something about who they were, whether they were going to be viewed as promiscuous by the larger community, by their families, So it's really understanding, again, the sociocultural and other structural barriers to begin to understand, well, what do we do about an educational initiative? What do we do about an actual intervention initiative that would reduce the impact? So all this to say, I mean, I'm highlighting this one particular project, but I think it's probably true of all our projects, is that without that community engagement piece, participatory piece, with whether it's a small P, a large P, that we're either getting skewed data or underestimated data or inaccurate data, to be quite frank. So when I say that it's an essential ingredient and a valid ingredient in how we think about our research and how we engage our students to engage us with us, I mean it.
Thanks, Maria. It's a good lead-in. I'm Amanda Taylor. I'm in SIS, and I want to focus both more on sort of the scholarly side, but I want to touch also on teaching too, which is something that I think is really key here, especially as I speak from the perspective of a term faculty member. And our work is centrally focused on teaching and service as well as the scholarship that we do. So from a scholarly perspective, there's sort of two fundamental ways of thinking about knowledge that have informed how I've approached my own work and projects throughout my time as a doctoral student and moving into my time as a scholar. The first piece is that fundamentally there are multiple forms of knowledge that exist in the world, and that academia only centrally highlights one or maybe two at best. And that secondly then, knowledge and the search for knowledge is more rigorous if in fact we blend these funds and forms of knowledge. So the first project that I want to look at talks about really that first domain, which is that there are multiple sort of forms of knowledge that exist in the world. It's a community-based project that I started when I was a doctoral student, and it was a really wonderful way of being trained, and I think that's an important thing for us to pay attention to as well, and will belie my focus on education, which is where I would sit. I was trained by two faculty members at the Harvard Graduate School of Education who were really focused on community-based work, specifically around community organizing for school reform in multiracial communities within the US. And what they did is over 3 years when we were doctoral students, we worked together on a long-term project that looked at successful examples of community-based organizing for school reform in different communities across the US. And in small teams of 2 to 3 doctoral students led by and mentored by our 2 faculty members, we worked for over 2 years to develop a project that highlighted why these projects were successful, the process through which these communities were able to achieve positive impacts in school reform emergent from their own families and communities' understanding of what wasn't working. Not sort of top-down interventions about what the district felt was wrong, but rather what families and communities themselves understood to be problematic about their experiences in school. So we each worked on small teams focused in one area in the US. We built the project together. This is how we learned how to do research, was fundamentally together as a group of 15 doctoral students working in collaboration with community. It was ugly and long, and wonderfully powerful in terms of really learning how the process works from soup to nuts. Then we did 2 years of ethnographic work with our communities. I was focused in New York City with a community-based organizing group there that worked on actually overcrowding in public schools in New York City and tried to figure out, again, alongside community, how they had been successful. And then at the end of this project, we collaboratively produced a book that was published by Oxford University Press called A Match on Dry Grass. And we then brought the community-based group back for a broad conference in which we presented together to talk about our findings. And we then presented the findings in a way that were not just in this sort of academic book, but also were sort of in multiple forms that worked and really networked into the community-based organizations and communities that we're interested in working with. So the second thing I want to talk about is really just to highlight that last piece. What we took away is something that's fundamental to community organizing itself, which is to say that the process is as important as the product. Right? It's not just about the wins, but it's in fact about what you do along the way to get to those wins that builds the sort of nature of the relationships, the social capital that Sonya and others have talked about. So the second thing I want to talk about is this notion of that there's more rigorous scholarship that emerges from the blending of multiple forms of knowledge. So I was also in part trained by a scholar named Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, who has come up with this wonderful way of working. It's a sociological frame called portraiture, and this is her book. I will advertise it. What portraiture does is it suggests that it blends sort of the aesthetics and the empirical. And it says that there's sort of a broad truth in understanding not just what sort of empirical social science can pursue and can prove, but in fact what aesthetics, what beauty helps to sort of reflect about what is true about the world. And that we bring those two things together, that it is a more rigorous form of sort of truth-telling about human and social experience. And so in working with Professor Lawrence Lightfoot, there are multiple things about portraiture that makes it sort of a different form of methodology, but one key piece that I want to highlight is really the centrality of the research relationship, which is in portraiture seen as not just something that you do to access an insider community, which is sometimes how we approach research, but instead, in some ways, then we can start to think about communities as barriers, right, to entry, but instead it really starts to look at communities as the opportunity for connection, right, connection to ourselves, connection to others, and connection to knowledge that is sort of more rigorous and more robust. So rather than getting knowledge from communities, we're actually engaging with communities in a long-term, rich way that enhances our shared capacity for broader truth in the world. And one of the things that portraiture centers within this research relationship domain is the idea that part of why we work with communities is that we search for goodness. And this is a rigorous form of goodness. This is not to say that we only just highlight, the perfect in the world, but it's that goodness is in fact fraught with tension. But the rationale for going into work with communities is not to look for pathology or to offer solutions, but instead to highlight what's working, what's true, and figure out better ways to support each other in our broad pursuit for knowledge. And I think really the takeaway there for me is how do we think about this work more broadly in terms of not pathologizing or offering sort of blanket solutions, but instead rather looking for sort of our shared meaning making and our shared truth. And then how can we kind of bring that into our teaching, specifically around some of the communities teaching that we do? How do we ensure that we don't replicate that sort of problematic domain in some of our community-engaged teaching? For example, the practica, which is something that I do, and I see Stephanie here, we can talk about more in SIS. We work with communities in our teaching practice, and I'm very sort of careful to try and figure out how I reflect those kinds of commitments in our work in that way.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to say I'm really jealous of all of my colleagues who've had so much success. I'm going to talk first about my failure of trying to do community-based research. So I was a postdoc in Philadelphia, and I was really interested in working with a group called the Food Trust, which is a organization that's done probably the most on creating policy around treating the obesity epidemic, trying to reduce racial and economic disparities in obesity and nutrition-related disease. And I was really excited. It's one of the things I was really looking forward to. And I was like, I had my hat on, I was going to go, I was going to figure this all out. And the minute I got there, I realized I was in way over my head. I didn't quite know what it was that they did, which was really important. And I don't think that was my fault. I think it's really hard to know what community organizations do. A lot of what they do is not advertised, it's not publicized, it's not the kind of thing they put on their website, but they have very systematic ways of working. This was an organization, I mean, oftentimes when you hear community organizations, you often think like, that it might be a sort of, this is like an extremely professionally run organization. So it wasn't necessarily that, it wasn't them, it was definitely me. And I kind of later realized that there were three problems that ended up in this not working out. One was that we had very different expectations of what each other did. So not only did they not know I did not know what they did, they didn't know kind of what the priorities and issues were for me, right? I was trying to get a job. I was a postdoc. I didn't have a full-time job. This was something really important in order to do that. I needed to publish. In order to publish, I needed to do kind of research that was ongoing, right? Looking at something new in a postdoc and trying to publish it in a year and a half is fool's errand. So I was working a lot on what I would need to do. So I didn't have a whole lot of time, but one of the most important things I learned was you need to constantly show up. You need to constantly be there. And that was one of my big problems, was I did not have the capacity at that time to be able to show up. And then there was also very different timelines, which I think is something not many people here have brought up, which is policymakers need to influence this legislative session right now. They need the evidence. It doesn't need to be perfect. They just need enough to be able to advocate for their position. Now we can talk about all the problems inherent in that and how that might be problematic. I don't actually think it's that problematic because we build a body of science over time, and part of the body of science involves policies that may go well or not go well, and we can test those things over time. But it means that, again, my priorities of publishing and getting a job, which I don't regret doing, were at odds. Thank you, American, for hiring me. Were at odds with what they needed done right now in order to succeed. And so, in the end, it was a failed collaboration, but I think I learned a lot from it. And I think it's important to recognize that many times we try these things, they're going to fail. Just like many times we try research projects, we don't get the results we think we're going to. We don't end up publishing what we think. And I think that's okay. And acknowledging that in the tenure process and the promotion process is really important. The second thing but having had that experience, I've since tried to be better and have approached things in a different way. And so I started last year, or 2 years ago, we piloted a DC area survey, which is a representative sample of DC area residents, and we want to try and keep this ongoing. We're trying to fundraise this now to keep it moving so that we can do this every year, because one of the things that policymakers continually said when I would meet, and I've had opportunities to speak here to meet with them, is saying basically we don't have good information over time. We oftentimes are making decisions based on collecting research after we know there's a problem. And so if we're not collecting data as things are changing, then there's no way we can know what the process was before we started looking at it. And so when they do have to go to the mayor, to the legislature, they need to be able to say this is the trend and this is what's happened. And so that's been one of the keys that I, as an academic, can actually have the time and energy and space and freedom, academic freedom, to be able to do that. And so it has been a really nice match to match both what I can do and train students and involve them in the process and colleagues, and what can be beneficial for them, and we can both get something out of the collaboration in again, a collaborative way where what are the problems that you're seeing right now that we can start to ask questions. It doesn't have to go through the entire OMB or the city or state equivalent of OMB process to get something done, which takes itself 6 to 8 months. For those of you who don't know that are working with the federal government, anything that the federal government sends out needs to go to the Office of Management and Budget, which means that any survey that you do has to be approved not only by the department you're working with, but also by the Office of Management and Budget. And if there are any problems, the review process starts over, basically. So if it gets kicked back, so this can take a very, very long time. We are not bound to that. All we have is our IRB, which is amazing here, I want to say. I've been in places where it is not, and it is amazing here. And that's not just to try and get my protocols here, I promise. I'm not this. But one of the things that made this collaboration possible, and I mentioned I had the opportunity to talk to policymakers, one of the things that was really, really important that you can do at any level is build a professional-looking website. By having a professional website, I displayed a lot of my research and translated my research from the academic into language that people could understand was one of the central ways that I've gotten to know both policymakers and also reporters, journalists. And that's been a great way to be able to engage. And then one of the best ways to get partnerships is to show up in the paper, because people read the paper still, I promise. And they then contact you and say, hey, I saw that you were working on this, we've been working on this. And that's a great way to build relationships. So I think I'm probably very close out of time, but I just had some thoughts on kind of these two experiences for me, both the failure and I hope more of an ongoing success. And one is, when we think about tenure guidelines, I think it's really important to think about the timing in our careers when we do collaboration and community-based research. I think unless you are someone who has already built it in graduate school, like Amanda, like Ben, I know there are people here who do it. I was not that person, and to try and do it when I was on tenure track would have been a disaster in many ways. And I think that's not only because it's not, and largely that's out of AU's control. I'm up for tenure now. Hopefully what I'm saying doesn't affect Maria's opinion of me, lesson that I learned is it is really hard, and if you don't already have the skills coming in, it's probably not the time to learn them, and to acknowledge that in our tenure guidelines. What I would say though is that where I think it really matters is in the promotion guidelines from associate to full. Because that's an area where having really strong mentors really matters. And Derrick has been great incorporating me in his projects, and I've been able to be involved. And being more senior, and I started trying to do this with the DC area survey and more junior colleagues anticipating being tenure. You can, as a more senior colleague, you can deflect some of those things and some of the pains that go along with community-based research. You can deal with and negotiate and help your junior colleagues get the publications that they need in order to succeed while still being engaged in learning the process and being involved. And so that's been something that's been really great. And I think it would also have the additional benefit that mentorship is often something that is highly gendered and highly racialized and not appreciated, and that this could be a specific instance in a specific way in which we can write policies to make sure that work is recognized. So thank you.
I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to edit this down a little bit. I'm Amanda Choutka, and I'm a professorial lecturer in the Writing Studies program. Like Amanda Taylor, my focus is also on teaching and service as turned faculty. I've been teaching community-based service learning writing 101 course for 8 years now, and I've taught in community-based research knowledge program. Both courses and programs mostly serve first-year students at American University. I became interested in community-based learning and service learning while I was an undergraduate at Dickinson College. My abroad experience was actually a semester and a summer interning with Horton's Kids in Washington, D.C. Horton's Kids is a comprehensive after-school program that serves families in Wellington Park and Anacostia. I came back to D.C. after I graduated college, continued to work for Horton's Kids on their development, camp, and education teams, and continued to volunteer with them through graduate school at American University. When I started teaching the college writing program, when it was then the college writing program in 2009, I started to realize there was a way to connect my teaching and desire to teach to my own desire to create a service learning course. I started teaching this course in 2011. My students volunteered with Horton's Kids, Thrive DC, One World Education, DC Reads, Kid Power, and Martha's Table, depending on the semester, and community partner needs. My course is first an academic writing course designed to teach our students in the second semester of their first year of college how to succeed at their writing projects and research projects throughout their time at American University. So first and foremost, it is a writing course and a research-based course. But their writing and research is based and inspired by their work in communities. And this is where the community-based learning aspect comes in. I've redesigned my course several times in recent years based on several types of feedback: community partner feedback, student feedback, my librarian's feedback, my intern's feedback, and my own observations of the course. In the last 3 years, my pedagogy for these courses has shifted slightly. I spend more time instructing my typically first-year students in how to volunteer in a new community with a focus on reciprocity, which begins with respect and intention. As a teacher, I strongly believe faculty who choose to teach community-based courses have an obligation first to the community and then to their students. We can't assume our students understand how to volunteer, and we must acknowledge the harm that could occur in these communities if students do not have ongoing instruction or the space to work through these new experiences in the classroom or their course assignments. We need to give students instruction in best practices for community engagement and community-based scholarship. And faculty have that obligation to prepare their students to volunteer and have to create a classroom where they can learn what is going on in their community-based experiences and figure out how to work that into their research or writing assignments. This kind of work is intense and dynamic, but it's vital creating community partnerships that support the needs of both communities and students. It's also vital for our first-year students who are entering a new academic community at American University, who are entering new communities in Washington, D.C., and do have a genuine desire to contribute to these new communities, but they need the framework and the instruction and the support to do that well. So I strongly believe that faculty need to spend more time on the instruction and the support phase of their courses. And especially for those of us who are teaching undergraduate students, we need to understand that those first few weeks of our courses are so vital to our students understanding these what seem basic ideas to us, but to a 19-year-old who is just learning these things, it's not as basic and obvious. So. And Jenny, for the last one.
Sorry for coming in late. I'm trying to shift gears from the 90-person first year. I teach criminal law, but my main teaching area is clinical in our clinics, in the criminal justice clinic, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm also our associate dean for scholarship research, so I'd love to talk about some interesting community engaged things a lot of people are doing in the law school, but I'm going to follow your instructions and also try to just keep it to 3 minutes and talk. I'm just going to give one example from that I think brings together teaching, service, and scholarship in a community engaged way, I hope. So in the clinical program, it's kind of this, we are community engaged of necessity. We're representing people in my clinic, in criminal court, people charged with low-level crimes, and juveniles and adults. And so obviously there's an interaction there, although there's a lot of the sort of getting up to speed. Some of my students come from the community of people that were represented. They may live in Montgomery County, they may come from Montgomery County, they may know the area, they may know a little bit about the court system, but most of them don't. And so I'm not going to repeat some of the really important things that I think Amanda just said about that part of it. Everything that I've ever written has come out of something that I have seen and worked on with my students in the clinic. And in that way, it's drawn directly from the teaching part of what the project that my co-director of the clinic and I are embarked on. Let me give you an example. I was finding over the years back from when I was a public defender and through the different places I taught that people charged with crimes are also feeling all these other effects out in the world of technology and criminal records, right? So they can't get jobs and they can't get housing, and we were starting to work on some of these issues. And pre-tenure, so it probably wasn't a very good idea, I was asked to be a reporter for the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers task force on the Restoration of Rights and Status after conviction. We spent 3 years traveling around the country and holding hearings about collateral consequences of criminal convictions, witnesses who testified, including affected individuals, law enforcement, prosecutors, defense lawyers, judges, and then I had to write a report, talk about a difficult collaborative experience, and I brought students into that. Now they weren't my clinic students because we weren't representing a client in court on the case, but my research assistants helped work on that, and we tried to bring these diverse voices together in a report. It's called Collateral Damage that the NACDL published. But of course, I was pre-tenure, and that was going to get me 0 credit for scholarship, believe it or not, even though I spent months and months writing this thing. And so I then took the research from that, and I wrote a law review article as part of a symposium that University of Wisconsin put on collateral consequences. And that, of course, did count in my tenure file. I also have taken just today, I was talking about one of the hearings that we did from this task force in my criminal law class, we were talking about sex offender registries and criminal law. And I talked about some of the testimony from law enforcement in class and integrated that. So it is all of a piece, I think. But more broadly, kind of stepping back from the specifics of the project, I do think it's really important to respect a diversity of ways in which to engage with the community. So we have at the law school, there are people who write, one of them, but other people do it too, write amicus briefs in Supreme Court cases. It doesn't seem particularly engaged in the community, but I wrote a brief in a case and helped moot the lawyer who argued it in the Supreme Court in a case involving a non-citizen who was going to get deported if he won his case in the Supreme Court, incredibly. So, those things may seem very high up and far removed, but they filter back down. And so I think it's really important to look at a diversity of communities, or how we define community, and a diversity of projects. But I also think that in our standards for promotion and tenure, we might take a broader look at ways in which people put things into writing and put it back into the community. So, I would like to send my report along. I think it was good that I wrote the law review article. I was in the scholarly, I am in the scholarly conversation about this topic. So I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I have the pressure to do that. But I also think that the report should have been part of that file, and it just wasn't. So just in terms of suggestions, I'm going to stop there and want to do some more interactions.
Great. First, a round of applause. And I think what we might do when we were discussing how to best make use of the time, take about 3 or 4 minutes to talk with the crew around you, 3 or 4 people. And our 2 major questions are, to what degree does the unit that you're involved in on campus already think about incorporating community engaged scholarship and teaching into their hiring, recruitment, promotion, tenure, assessment guidelines? And how would you classify or constitute excellence in this realm? How would it look different? Is it a longer time frame? Is it multiple outlets for distribution? Is it more community, even layered assessments of a project, getting a community voice in the evaluation? And even the difficulty of defining who's community, I feel like much of this work, administrators are like, we don't want to touch it, because who gets to talk about who is the community even? Who gets to represent the community? But I think our panelists, where those hard questions are actually the reason to have all the more conversation about this. That's not the excuse to run away from this realm of scholarship, but actually diving into the complexity of those conversations requires all the more debate and discussion. So we'll just take a few moments to talk amongst yourself, introduce your own work, and then we'll regroup and collaboratively discuss.
You want to go right there?
Get an academic talk has that goes through is that they want to foreground the community. So when I just here, they want some vague sense of how you would engage with the community. They want clear source of community engagement, design a project, working through the project, benefiting from the project, sufficient level of funding from the project. They don't want to take community engagement. There's some comments seems to appear that kind of process. Really sharing participatory. There's a lot of that, but that's okay. It's like category is fine for some people. It would be terrible for some others. actually
But the one professor already
What happened with the
absolutely should have to that's something that
All right, I think we might regroup. And a few of the things that we've been talking about are even little things like open access journals. You know, journals that are not behind a paywall, and you work with community partners and international partners. Can they access the journals that you're publishing in? So, you know, at unit to unit, can we value publications in open access journals? Something, you know, that's specific, but it's part of a larger commitment to this. And so metrics, these rubrics, on the slide, one of the slides I had, if you can imagine it, there are these resources that are proliferating across campuses right now on the Carnegie Center for Community Engagement, Imagining America, Association of Public Land-Grant Universities, the NSF even we were discussing. So all of these organizations, actually many people are saying academia has long been extractive in its data collection and kind of the ivory tower model, and it's not working. It's not working intellectually, it's not working socially. So the public good commitment of universities, be they public or private, we need to really foreground and actively support in our training of students and in our tenure files. So maybe we'll just start with this part of the room where there are key thoughts you had or questions or through lines.
Maybe do you want to share your?
We were just talking a little about how external review letters seem like the place to give context to whether the quality of the participation and the engagement, the power sharing is appropriate, because so often the trade-off is the amount of time you have to spend. And that is really hard to weigh. It doesn't seem like adding that to the tenure process. Oh, I spent 5,000 hours working with the community. Like how that seems like that doesn't necessarily seem the direction, but maybe as part of the guidance for those letters or how those letters are understood. But this is said as someone who's like a third of the way along that tenure process. So I say that as a question, because I actually should say I also don't know, and I'm very curious whether that's appropriate.
I vote briefly on that point, and Ben is more than a third of the way along. What I would say is external letters are very powerful, and so I think your insight and the insight of your group is spot on, that they can be quite instrumental in your file. And so I think it is possible for units to give more directive or more guidance to writers of external letters in terms of what is valuable and what the unit would enjoy hearing more specific feedback on.
Great, thank you. And maybe now the middle room.
So we're with the library here in the middle. So I think we sort of have sort of two branches of thoughts, and one is sort of our own library committee and faculty committee and bringing these things up there. And when the ISETS conference took place, I emailed our chair and said, maybe this is a thing we can have a conversation about, but I'm not yet on that committee because I'm pre-continuing status. So at least there's sort of, we've opened the door to start having that conversation internally. But we also have folks who are very prominent in the metrics conversation, right? We have Rachel Borchardt has published a book on alt metrics and how we incorporate metrics into how we think about scholarship. So I think we as librarians have a very real opening here to have more conversations with you all and the kinds of metrics you're developing so that we can be partners with you and that we can help you explore that and promote that and really be drivers in that conversation. So I have all sorts of notes about who I want to recruit to try to present at the colloquium on libraries and service learning this year. So if you're interested, please reach out and I'll be reaching out to you. But so I think that
that, you know, we've got that two-tiered approach in the library that we need to move forward with in terms of how are we in the library engaging in the community, and is that something we should be looking at for our own files? And then how are we as folks who talk about and care about metrics, partnering with people who are blazing new ground in measuring their work? So let's be partners.
I think just one thing on the library side I think would be fantastic is the progress that's been made on the sort of open access, shared working paper, white paper. I think the work that you guys have been, the institutional repository, the work that's already been done in that space is fantastic, and I think more of that is better, because as we can sort of make preprints available and, you know, sort of pre-copies of what we're working on available through that institutional repository so that more people can access it would be another contribution the library can make.
Absolutely, and a quick follow-up to that, in case anybody has not heard, we have funds, we have an open access fund in the library now where you can get up to $3,000 from the library to publish your work in an open access journal. So go to our website, find that page, apply for that money, because we do want to support you in your open access publishing.
Thank you. And maybe that side of the room, any insights or questions?
I'll be virtually taking notes.
I mentioned briefly how I think the strategic planning effort that we're currently in, have some members of the strategic planning body present, that could well be an opportunity to highlight further the value of the work being done in this realm and the way in which it's understood by the university and indeed trumpeted by the university.
All right, let me give this a shot. So I'm Carl from SIS. So I have tenure, and I don't think I really felt like my community engagement, when I was doing community engagement, wasn't properly evaluated or valued. But I do sometimes wonder now, in retrospect, if sometimes the engagement was valued in and of itself, and I want to think about whether it was effective or not, and if I was actually changing just one life at a time, or if I was actually making the world a better place. And I want AU to be an institution that makes the world a better place. And so I'm just wondering, you know, how do we think about replication? How do we think about scaling up? How do we think about whether AU is really helping us build that vision? Us as the people who are AU.
I have one response to that. So just quickly, Carl, for me, there are two areas that I would point to for the replication scaling up having a bigger impact. So on the work that we did was supported by the Nippon Foundation. So we had, like many of my colleagues here, so we had grant funding to do the work. We've done the academic publication on the work just to try to share what we did. But for us, one of the key indicators, I'll just give you two quick points, is the International Telecommunication Union has come to us now. They were in Mexico, they saw what we did, they said, can we work with you now to replicate what you did in Mexico for this community with another opportunity for the disability community to do this work with the ITU. And so for us, that has huge impact that they now take this on. They're gonna fund it themselves. And so they then take this on and, you know, buy their own robots and, you know, we'll work with them to get them started. But to me, that now will have huge impact on the ongoing ability for the disability community to engage with the ITU. And so for me, that's just, you know, fantastic.
One of the things we're brainstorming is a repository of scholarship that has drawn upon these methodologies to show that it is making an impact in its various respective disciplines, and to show that it's robust, cutting-edge research across these disciplines, but also a repository of troubleshooting, you know, resources about how to work with community partners, the pitfalls, the risks, the privileges, the asymmetries, the co-optations, you know, that are involved. It's very time-consuming and complex work to have shared analysis and iterative dialogic analysis. And so almost like a troubleshooting network, but also a network of successes, a network of, Mike was saying, you know, things that weren't successful, but a way that scholars on campus could learn from each other's work, and also, though, at an outward-facing show that AU is really committed to this, and really doing cutting edge work in this realm, even as they're exploring what it even means methodologically.
And I think part of that is, so AU is I think no longer a member of Imagining America, and that was a space where, that was really being kind of foregrounded, and I think we're still a member of what you're doing, but, we could sort of consider, is it important, for AU to be recognized in these spaces, by rejoining these networks and institutional arrangements that are trying to promote this.
I'll just add, I think there's also, I don't know how many of you got to watch the video this morning from a student perspective. And I think one of the things that's coming out both from our graduate and our undergraduate population here is this idea of civic engagement. And I think civic engagement can have different, permutations, as we've talked about, there are different lines, sort of it's on a spectrum. There isn't just one model for this. But as far as, student demand, and asking of faculty and researchers who engage them and engage each other and engage the larger communities of which they are a part, whether through research or service, learning, opportunities, etc. Certainly Marcy will know, I'm sure she can write and speak to this at volume. But, there's I think a push, and it's larger than American University. But I think American University can play a really integral and vital part in being at the sort of forefront of what does it mean to be a community engaged institution, what does it mean for our teaching, what does it mean for our research, and the sorts of folks we keep hiring and keep recruiting as far as students to come who, they are there, they want this. So I think there's an imperative at different levels for community engaged research, certainly for promotion and tenure, which, I used to be of the mind that, yes, pre-tenure doesn't really make sense, and certainly when I was a graduate student, but now, maybe like Carl, being post-tenure, I'm thinking, I need to be a part, like you are, Garrett, soon to be tenured faculty and other people here, regardless, of where you are in the community, at American University, to push for this idea that, yes, this can be done, it should be done, to echo what Mary was talking about from a strategic perspective, for the overall vision of this institution, but that, it doesn't have to be a pre-tenure situation. It can involve all of us, term, adjunct, to push for this. I'd like to think we can do this at a pre-tenure space as well, and that it shouldn't just be post-tenure. Jenny.
Yeah, I guess I would just kind of picking up on that theme and tying it back to the whole letter idea. Maybe it's on my mind because I just finished writing a tenure letter for somebody yesterday, and I write a lot of them, and it is so unsatisfying weaving in the standard that I'm given, which is generally like a really bland, generic paragraph. I mean, legal scholarship is its whole own. That's a whole different conversation. But yeah, but it made me think as I'm listening to this. I guess I don't know. I didn't think about not doing things that were coming out of my interest in public defense and that work, just because I would bored myself to death with any of the writing I was trying to do, but I do think people are steered by what they think is later coming down the pipe, whatever kind of review it is. But if you're so I would love to have a letter from the people asking me to write a letter that said, here's how we define community engaged scholarship, and here's how we would like you to address it, but that requires defining it, which is I think part of the foundational project that we're trying to do here. And I don't know if there'd be any agreement, but I would also want to be careful because I think measuring, when you get to issues of measurement, you measure impact in really, really different ways. In legal scholarship, you cannot measure by citation count, and it's pretty much a joke to do it that way, and a mistake. And so I might have a colleague who's writing in an area like critical race theory, which is very important, but people are not going to be citing, hundreds and hundreds of times. And the article I wrote that had the word sexually violent offender in the title gets cited more than anything else. You know, and I know it's not, because it's the best article, or most important article I wrote. So I do think we have to be careful about how we kind of think about these things. And it's got to be really meaningful.
And I think this flexibility in the guidelines, depending on if you're tenure track, tenure term faculty, matters really greatly. I think in some ways I'm in a unique and privileged position because I think the Writing Studies program does value community-based work, and I think I have benefited from that in my own reappointment promotion process. I don't think that's true for all units across the university, and I wonder if we can look at certain programs and look at their models of reappointment promotion and see if there are any things that could be applied to other programs.
Exactly, I think. Yes.
I was going to say one thing on that. I think that this is one of those areas where the disciplines have to be really involved, because I know in sociology the kind of applied set would be difficult to try, even if you try to write letter and say this is what we do. Sociologists are not going to be writing about that. They're going to be writing. It's not an applied discipline. It's not. It's, you know, and so even if you put that into the letter, I don't think it's going to come out. And I think being aware of the differences between professional programs and disciplines is something that's important, because the letter writers, regardless of what you tell them, are going to do what they're going to do. And so being careful about not getting letters back that are less than positive because we've kind of set people up in that way.
But I think that you raise a point too of, as a letter writer, you have the opportunity to expand that generic paragraph that they give you. I wrote for someone who was basically a community-based scholar, and I spent a lot of time trying to provide evidence for them because the guidelines they sent me didn't include that at all.
Which gets to the topic of latent expertise that is in this room and beyond. So maybe a way forward is to, we have your email addresses. We might be thinking of a follow-up version of this sometime in 2018. The task force itself is going to be meeting this summer, and so the AU will have to kind of check in and say how we're progressing as a campus on this front. So I might send out a link, and then we might be brainstorming as a panelists about an ongoing forum to keep alive this discussion with very discipline and unit-specific iterations of this, but as a broader intellectual project. So thanks, guys. And